ascending through cosmic spheres like vapor, and tracing constellations on what great paper were the heavens ordered, sketched, and folded. Into black origami we can only gaze at. A century seems an arm's breadth. An orbit feels like stillness. The universe forges matter. Exploration wills us.
For those of you listening, Aaron just performed a riveting interpretive dance along with his poem.
The problem is I got about halfway through, or maybe just one or two lines through, and I realized this is more difficult than I had imagined, like miming the lines as I spoke them. So I apologize. And obviously I realized this is a podcast.
Yeah.
It's solely for your benefit.
For my benefit. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
So thank you for that interpretive dance, that beautiful poem. It very nicely introduces what we're going to be talking about today, which is space. We're also going to be talking about greenwashing and tree rings.
Yep.
So stay tuned for that.
Outer space, to be specific.
Yeah.
And I was inspired by an unlikely source, Dante, the Divine Comedy, the third part of which Paradiso takes place basically in space, if it's in like
sphere?
The celestial spheres. That's why he's ascending through the spheres. That's why I opened with that. And then I was just kind of like, space is cool. It's so big. It's crazy how stars, from our perspective, are maybe an arm's breadth away or a couple fingers, but really they are, well, they might be dead, but they're like very, very far apart.
Yeah, space is crazy.
And I was just thinking about the aesthetics of space travel, because we've spoken before about how the really appealing aesthetics of marine biology or seafaring in general has kind of inspired in me this future goal of becoming a marine biologist. I'm not quite there yet with being an astronaut. Maybe if we keep watching Doctor Who, then I'll reach there in a few weeks. But what do you think is so appealing about the aesthetics of space exploration to begin this episode, Alicia, of Solacene, the podcast designing the beautiful, sustainable, tactile future? Also, do you think we should start every episode by saying that?
I don't see why not. It's a nice motto. We worked hard on it, and it does lend a lot of information to what this podcast is about.
In a concise way. Should we say we're your hosts, Aaron and Alicia?
We're your hosts, Aaron and Alicia, and this is Solacene. Yeah, probably not. We'll just work it in.
The thing is, I like when it's a bit more of just a conversation with you and I. When I think about other people listening to this, if I dare to think about other people watching this, then internally I just start to weep. So
yeah, and sometimes externally.
Yeah.
So just you and I here today. We're going to talk about space as we do most days. And due to our Doctor Who era, it's been a bit more common. So the aesthetics of space, the reason it's so appealing is because it's at once ancient and super futuristic.
New stars are being forged. Robots.
Yeah. But it's also, you think about the different gods that the stars were named after or believed to be in the planets and everything.
Right.
And that's very ancient. And you might think, perhaps at once we knew the planets better than we do today. And someday we'll know them as well as we used to. As primal beings.
Yeah, I found this quote. I didn't write it down, but it was something like, because later on I want to talk about light pollution. Because that's like, I was preparing for the episode and then I was like, wait, light pollution. This is a brutal thing that we haven't talked about in Solacene. This is the episode to do it. But there was this quote that I saw online that said something like, the stars no longer govern our society the way they used to. And I was like, that's really sad in all the different interpretations. Like, none of them are a good thing, really.
Yeah.
Speaking of like constellations and the shapes in the sky, what's your sign, Alicia?
Gemini?
What does that mean?
I don't know. I know Kanye's a Gemini. That's about all I know.
Why do you know so much about Kanye?
Because we did a Kanye episode.
That's true.
Once upon a...
I'm an Aries.
Yeah.
Which means fiery, passionate, and high energy.
Honestly?
I think that everybody would say that about themselves.
Honestly, I think you're fiery, passionate, and energetic.
But I was just kind of dropping those little hints because we want to do an episode after the nature semester that is about the hosts. So that's like a little teaser for people.
Yeah, teaser trailer. So the stars governing society, I don't think it needs to be purely religious, the way it once was.
Yeah.
But definitely, as you were alluding to with the light pollution, it used to be follow the North Star. You'd be a bit more familiar with the constellations as a form of navigation.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps they were your nightlight.
Yeah.
Or just even growing up in a more rural place, it was an activity of, we're going to go look at the stars.
That's true.
But since we've lived in a city for a couple of years, it's like,
we're going to look at the green haze.
Yeah, there's a nice green haze over Montreal. For anyone who lives here, you know the haze. It's from this tower that emits this beam of light that I once thought was the Aurora Borealis and almost cried. I was so excited.
Yeah, I once thought it was a UFO.
Yeah, but then we realized it's just a tower with this brutal green light. But we haven't seen a star in, like, forever.
Yeah.
Kind of sad.
That's not really true. But we don't see very many stars.
Yeah.
And also, I think even if it's not the active task of or endeavor of, I'm going to look at the stars, wow, look what I can spot. Mm-hmm. There's a certain personality or humility that you get from living underneath them every day, because, mm-hmm. I mean, we know, because as we said, we used to live in a more rural place, so we've had this like experience. It makes me kind of sad that there are some people who are just born and raised in cities and so have never seen a night sky. Like, that's very tragic. Mm-hmm. And I think even where we were, it wasn't the purest night sky ever, which is true. Definitely on my bucket list mm-hmm. to see or just live there. But there's something about every night you see this like giant scope of things that puts things into perspective that might be a good like analogy for what we're kind of losing as a society or as a species. There was this quote about light pollution. It was from a book called Our Vanishing Night, written by Verolyn Klinkenborg. And it says, in most cities, the sky looks as though it has been emptied of stars, living behind a vacant haze that mirrors our fear of the dark and resembles the urban glow of dystopian science fiction. Mm-hmm. I was going to just read it and pretend like it was me talking.
Oh, yeah.
Because I want to be as poetic as that, but yeah, that's how I feel. And there's a lot of statistics about what light pollution does, potential impacts that it has on different species, not just humans, and obviously to our like sleep rhythms, mm-hmm. and also ways to stop it. But I just found this one fact, this one estimate, which was that 30% of light from streetlights is just projected almost directly upwards. Mm. So it's like, in terms of the energy and money wasted on this, like even that is reason alone to think about, maybe we could fix this, even if you just disregard the stunning beauty of the nighttime vistas.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Yeah, even last night, I woke up in the middle of the night and was slightly annoyed. I was like, why is it just daylight in here?
Yeah.
But it was like 1 a.m. from all the street lights. And it's not every night, but sometimes, especially with all the snow, it really projects inward through the window slits. I had a list of pros and cons of space exploration, because what spurred this question was me listening to the Economist podcast on the private space race, which I feel like everyone knows peripherally that it's happening.
Yeah.
There's SpaceX, and then therefore there must be other competitors happening. But I didn't realize to what extent we have basically entered the age of commercial space exploration, travel, and it's kind of crazy. Made me physically sick listening to be honest.
Okay.
Because there was a person on there talking about how Nokia, how do you pronounce that phone brand?
Sure.
They are setting up, or planning to, on the far side of the moon, a sort of 3G, I guess it's not 3G, whatever G, like a kind of data situation. So it's like, they can sell their data plans to spaceships.
Oh, okay.
And then it's also talking about a bunch of other commercial opportunities. Just made me sick, to be honest.
Oh, right. Why did it make you sick?
Because...
Is it because space is such a pure virgin wilderness? In line with the nature semester, that's why we didn't talk about it, because it's like the forested continent before it was deforested. Is that
honestly,
what it's like?
Yeah.
Okay.
It just feels so wrong. It's like we should have learned from the past of or just exploiting natural, untouched areas, but we just haven't learned the lesson. And instead of the slow progress, maybe it took 200, 300 years to kind of get to the late stage capitalism on the moon doesn't even get the early stage capitalism. It just gets late stage.
It just gets billboards and cell towers.
Exactly. Okay. And it was very sad to me. And this is why I wanted to list of pros, cons, and then the Solacene version of space exploration. So there are pros, which I think I support space exploration in theory. It's great for the imagination, for creativity. And as we were discussing, it's a good alternative to kind of the AI metaverse investments of talent and money, because at least space is real. Yeah. At least in theory, it could lead to some kind of cool new discoveries.
Right.
And a couple other pros are that it's a frontier for the imagination and something for people to strive for, perhaps.
Space. The final frontier.
Exactly.
I think that's from Star Trek, right? I think.
And the cons are that it's unethical use of resources.
Okay.
Given that there is still hunger, poverty, climate change, war, the likes. And it's also just expanding resource extraction. So this is another reason why this podcast made me rage, is because the biggest pros they were talking about were, well, we could get oil from the moon. We could get water from the moon. We could get perhaps there's some untapped resources. Perhaps it could be a stopping point for explorations to Mars or whatever. And it's just like, if that's what we're thinking of, going to the moon just to take, that's a con.
What do you think we should go to the moon for?
Fun, perhaps. But the thing is, it would have to be zero environmental impact.
On the moon?
On everything. Okay. Because right now, every spaceship or whatever rocket thing goes up, just bursts a hole through the ozone layer, which we've been working so hard to repair.
Okay.
It also just, because it's so hard to get things back to Earth, for the most part, a lot of things that are launched into space are just floating around the atmosphere. So we've just polluted the sky. We've polluted space already. It's very densely packed with space garbage. And SpaceX, I think they've developed a kind of reusable rocket. And it does greatly reduce the cost of space exploration and the resources. But it's still it shouldn't be the priority right now.
Okay.
And it's also just an escapist mindset that I don't think is great.
Sure.
We shouldn't be setting our sights to the moon. We should be setting our sights to a habitable planet. And it was talking about it'll be good for having colonies on the moon and when there's eventually colonies on Mars and so on. But I think that should be the goal for 300 years in the future. It shouldn't be the goal for 100 years. A couple other things is that, it's just really wasteful. We're just exporting materials. We're already having a shortage and issue with sourcing the materials needed for batteries, for solar panels, and for renewable energy things. You need batteries.
Yep.
And so we shouldn't be sending all those just into space kind of willy-nilly. And finally, I saw a really moving quote from a person who was defending space exploration, and it said, it was opposing people like me who think we should not be going to the moon yet or shouldn't be going to space. And he said, it's the kind of thinking that would have kept Christopher Columbus on Europe. It was just that was just a funny quote to me, because it's obviously Christopher Columbus going to North America was quite a disastrous thing for the planet. And dare I say, for society. But
wow, okay.
That's obviously extreme, needs a lot of unpacking and air quotes.
Yeah.
But I was just it was just a funny quote to me. Because I was maybe...
I mean, I brought along almost the exact same quote, to play devil's advocate, because I knew we'd kind of disagree on this.
Yeah.
So the exact question, I'll just, my points actually kind of correspond to yours nicely in a somewhat agreeing, somewhat disagreeing way.
Yeah.
The exact question that we had today was, what's the point of space exploration?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to quote the immortal words of JFK, which is, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they are hard.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously said that talking about going to the moon. But I think in general, it's an ethos that is, it sums up some of the best of, in my opinion, the human spirit, which is striving.
Yeah.
There's a painting that I think we referenced in the most recent zine, the Nature Zine. Shout out to the Nature Zine if you want to buy that and read a little physical manifestation of the Solar Scene podcast. You can click the link in the description. And there's also 2 other zines that you can order. Which was by, I think, a German painter called Caspar David Friedrich, which is the man on the mountain, overlooking the environment, surveying. And I just think that's I think space exploration is good.
Yeah, I mean, pictures of Earth from the moon are what sparked Earth Day in the 70s for the first time. Like, it did bring about a lot of positive, not ethical, but
your main concern seems to be with the sustainability of it.
The sustainability
because
of it.
We have the tactility. We have the beauty.
Yeah.
But it's not sustainable.
It's not especially sustainable.
And I had this kind of this theory that in effectively a post-scarcity society, which we are, a lot of us are already at, or we will very nearly be at in the coming decades, meaning most people in the developed world don't worry about or don't want for almost anything. And we talked a little bit last week about the dangers of like AI and deepfakes and just the metaverse, and we don't like the way this is going. And I had this thought that in such a society where the world is explored and there's a general kind of boredom or malaise or nihilism that creeps in, the options are either we go out, like to space, i.e. we explore, or up, or we go in, i.e. to the Wall-E or Matrix society where it's like, I'm just going to slap on my headset and explore space like this, or go to Peru like this. And obviously we prefer the former because it's the real world. But I understand your point about sustainability. That's obviously a concern. I don't have concerns about extracting from the moon just because it's like nothing lives there. So I say we should take from the moon what we can get. But I understand
it's the mindset.
The mindset of going to there. Yeah, I get that. Like going just as this machine that takes, rather than maybe with the wonder of exploration in mind. Like I understand that for sure.
Like I think in the Solacene, there will definitely be space exploration. But the Solacene is obviously a post-climate change, post-bad times, basically.
Yeah.
Utopia that we imagine. So it's like space travel then would be fine. Like there would just be enough for everyone on the planet. And it'd be cool. Maybe you go shoot a film on the moon. There's maybe space tourism. It's done in a way that doesn't punch holes in the ozone somehow.
Yeah. I just think it's the point of the species.
And I think that's fine. And I don't think it's ethically wrong in theory. I'm not especially a utilitarian person, but when it comes to space travel, I'm slightly utilitarian at the moment because I'm like, what has it brought us? There's always, in the defense of space travel, these lists of things that has brought us. And it's like, we definitely could have just figured out how to do these things without leaving the atmosphere.
Right, but they did do those things.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's good. And I get your point about the money should be used elsewhere effectively. Like that's always the argument. But I just think, again, playing devil's advocate, like that has always been the case in history, that there's always a more humane use of money.
Yeah, and I also think...
But there are multiple ways, I think, to raise a society. Like you can either donate to a charity, or you can start a podcast talking about something because you think that'll help. Yeah. Or it's like you could start a charity, or you could build a rocket because you think this will help and this will inspire. Like I just think that it's not so black and white a thing as you're either giving or you're taking in terms of how people use that. And of course, like it would be, I think in the Solacene, it's nicer if it's a public endeavor. Like if it's NASA or whatever. Like I think that's a cooler thing when then that way everyone kind of feels like they're contributing and it doesn't feel like it's just a rich person's plaything, which maybe is a lot of people's concern now. It's like it just seems like a selfish thing. Yeah. But I don't know. I just and again, you were talking about like some people want to own the moon, or like people claiming parts of the moon or different asteroids. Or I saw this thing. It was like some company in China wants to launch basically an artificial moon that would be like a light source. Like there's a lot of like dark and dystopian ideas like that. But I think fundamentally it's neat. And I think to answer the question of like, what's the point? It's the same answer to what's the point of life, or like what's the point of anything? I mean, if you want to be like depressing and nothing, it's all pointless, and people can be like that. But I just think if there's a mountain, we should climb it.
Yeah, I just don't think our political theory, our moral development, or our, dare I say, like, understanding of the human body, or like mind. I definitely think, it's always like, well, why do we have movies then? Why do we have any kind of art or any kind of solely mental endeavors or solely aesthetic endeavors? And I appreciate that. And I think when it comes to, there's kind of a line perhaps in my mind between leaving the atmosphere. I don't know why it's so strong in my mind, but at the moment, I just think our brains and our understanding of the human brain is not deep enough. Like, we should be going inward that way, like to try and research how our minds work. Yeah. And I think our understanding of politics, I think we need some more philosophers. We need a few more Platos before we can go to the moon.
But I just feel like both can happen. And I also think that space, like exploration just helps like that. I had this, like the ways I listed that is the point of living is to be, to explore, to expand, and to learn. Like I think it teaches you, and it's kind of like, this is a bit of a weird analogy, but when people talk about couples having babies, you know, or getting pregnant, and they always say like, we're not ready. And someone says, no one ever is. You know, people always say that. I think it's like that, but for society, it's like, but we're not ready to go to America. It's like, because as you said, Europe might have not been great or whatever, but it's like going to America subsequently, like it helps quite a bit. It does some cool things. And I think space, I mean, it's not just finding new planets, but there might be, like, if there are precious metals, you know, the metals that people are like mining, you know, in an unsustainable way to source for electronics, like that would be a good thing. Or if there's new species, imagine finding aliens.
Yeah,
that would be crazy. Imagine finding aliens, or like a new element. If you found a new element, what would you call it? Solacenium.
Yeah, there you go. Solacase.
Solacase.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, two things.
Right.
One, there's definitely enough people and money in the planet to solve all the problems.
That's what I mean.
And it's like what you were saying with the podcast and so. It's like, yeah, you don't have to do everything. People can kind of divide and conquer. And I think that's totally true. But I also think if society was advanced enough to be able to go to space, like that I would think it would be ethical, I think society would be a bit more self-aware. Like in Herland, that book about the female utopia kind of
isolated community
that had developed along like at the same time as the rest of the world, and it was kind of set in the real world except for this one little area. But the people of Herland were like, oh, maybe we're ready to go out and explore the rest of the universe or the rest of the world. Like they always could have, but they had the self-awareness to be like, no, we need to not just have our own people taken care of, but have our mindset right. But I feel like if you kind of jump the gun and go like Christopher Columbus or like us to space, it's like I don't think our mindset is right. It's a bit too...
You think they're pulling the cart before the horse or whatever they say.
Yeah.
But I just feel like that in the long run that works too, is basically what I'm saying.
Everything will work.
Yeah, everything works. This is where the podcast gets a bit rocky because we're kind of talking about, and the second question today, we're also talking about it like a transitional thing. Because we're talking about space travel in the era of Nestle and AI and unsustainability, but we're also trying to kind of, at the same time, design
imagine what it could be
in the solar scene where everything's solved. So that's a little bit confusing.
Yeah,
but with regards to the aesthetics, remember when the NASA logo got so big? You have the socks. Don't deny it.
I do have NASA socks. It's true.
Why do you think that was the case?
Well, it was kind of the 80s becoming a thing again.
Right.
And so with the 80s comes space exploration and so on. And yeah, we haven't put a man on the moon in like, 15, 20 years? So it's like, it's kind of cool.
It's a cool logo.
Yeah.
It is.
And I'm not anti-NASA.
Solacene X NASA when? Ooh.
But
the Solacene rocket.
The commercialization.
We could buy the moon.
I can't buy the moon.
I'm just saying all the things opposite to what you think.
Yeah.
We could buy that cell
tower.
Cool.
Yeah, they're ineffective with their use of money and use of resources, and that's why commercialization to an extent is good, because if it's a corporation, they have a bit like they owe stuff to the stakeholders, and they have all those like checks and balances of like a corporation versus a government.
Yep.
And on this podcast, I did talk a bit about something that I thought was cool about how corporations are more effective than government, and that's low key what we're thinking with Solacene is like trying to kind of take your own route is perhaps more effective at enacting change, and talked about that in a kind of cool way about space travel, government versus private, but I still think just not ideal.
I had another two benefits about space travel. And one is that it gives even more of an appreciation for our planet and the nature that we have because of how desolate space is.
Mm-hmm.
Like when people talk about terraforming Mars or finding water on the moon, I think they do it in a very hopeful way, but also it's like, it's hard to overestimate how like unlivable every other planet that we've ever found within reach is.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen The Martian?
Have seen The Martian.
That guy goes through the ringer. Let's put it like that. And that's just one person.
Yeah.
So I think that would, like when you go out there and you just see like, oh, we're pretty far from everything and this is going to take a long time, then it gives that more appreciation for, like, you come down here, there's an apple tree. No apple trees on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is that I feel like society needs a narrative of some kind of growth or expansion to feel happy, healthy, useful, and like there's a purpose. It might be religion, like that was, so often the domineering force that kind of did that. But we live in kind of a secular society now. I'm not sure about the Solacene. Maybe we'll save that for a different episode. And I think especially coupled with the degrowth of the Solacene, which as we talked about a lot during that semester, can be perceived as a stagnation, even though it really isn't, because we are still improving in a lot of ways. I feel like having that very overt, almost superficial, like we are literally going somewhere that we haven't gone before. Like I think that's very, like that's something that people would feel a little bit better about putting their tax into, for instance. Like that's something that makes people feel like this species and the society is not a lost cause, which I feel can infect a lot of, especially young people today, in a negative way, obviously. The last thing about space that I wanted to talk about was antimatter, because this has always fascinated me. I wanted to also talk about black holes, but it would have gotten a bit too sci-fi. But antimatter is like, it sounds sci-fi, but it's just real. So it is consisting of antiparticles, obviously. Do you know any of them?
No.
Well, in like matter, we have protons, neutrons, electrons. So what do you think are the anti-versions?
Is it just anti-proton, anti-neutron, anti-electron? Okay.
Yes, but the anti-electron is called the positron. And antimatter is used in Star Trek as a fuel. It's what enables their crazy like speed of light travel. And I think, this is my belief, not speaking scientifically, that it is probably the way.
Fair enough.
Antimatter has not really been like researched or explored much because it's so volatile a thing. It basically reacts with matter whenever it comes into contact. And I think the word that Wikipedia used was annihilates. So it's like there's a big release of photons, and it's a big energy, potential untapped energy source is what I'm saying. So watch that space. Not sure if you'll be watching it in our lifetime, but antimatter, I just think it's very cool.
Yeah.
And we do use it already. Scientists have been able to produce like very, very, very tiny amounts of it through like lasers and particle accelerators and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think positrons are used in CAT scans.
Huh.
Speaking of CAT scans, or speaking of cats, the organism of the week this week, it's the Great Basin bristlecone pine tree, Pinus longeva. This is Alicia's organism, but I'm narrating for her.
Thanks, Aaron. So this is the oldest living tree in the world, the species that lives the longest of the trees and has the current existing long tree. So the current in the 90s, the actual longest was accidentally cut down.
Oh, yeah. That's what inspired Fangully.
Yeah. But there's currently one that is about 5,023 years old. The man who cored the tree to determine how old it was died in when did he die?
We don't need to know that, do we?
We do.
When did he die? What was the day?
He died on... I don't know. He died in like 2013, 2015, that time.
Okay.
When things went wrong, as you would say. And he took the core with him and the location of the tree.
What do you mean he took it with him? To...
It was lost.
Heaven.
Yeah, like to his grave. So it's funny because he wouldn't tell anyone where the tree was.
What?
We know it's in California.
Wait, so they don't actually know where this pine tree
Apparently
is?
there's some people in the government do know where it is.
But they don't want to tell anybody.
Because they don't want anyone to like
Hack
protest
it
by it or whatever. Like they wanted to just live in peace. Anyway, so he knew the location, and it's the oldest living tree. It's 5,062 years old. And these trees grow to be 5 to 15 meters high, 2.5 to 3.6 meters around. They have bright orange and yellow bark, but usually because they're so old, there's only kind of like one strip of living cambium kind of alive in them.
Okay.
So it's like there'll be like a couple living branches and like one living strip. So a lot of the workings of the tree are dead. So they look a bit more brown when you see them in real life. They regenerate very quickly, like their primary organisms. Like if there's a fire, these guys will like spring up really quickly. They're very resistant at one, like as a species on a genetic level, but they're also very susceptible to any kind of insect infestations, bacterial infestations, because they're so old.
Where are they found?
They're found in Utah, in California, and in Nevada. And they live often in high elevations. And it's kind of funny. They make forests, in air quotes, but there's like a few meters in between them. So it's like if you see a forest of them, it looks kind of like a grove of some type because they're so spaced out.
Ah.
But that's why they're so good for like, if there's a fire, they come in and they grow. So they are fixing nutrients in the soil, but they also leave a lot of space. They only cover about 5 to 15% of the canopy. So like species on the ground can also grow.
And what do they eat?
They eat light and water and so on.
I was trying to trick you.
Yeah. Their leaves stay green for up to 45 years. Well, they're not leaves. They're needles. But a needle will like stay for like 5-10 years and then fall and then like regrow. But these ones, are up to 45 years, which is kind of cool. They were red listed in 1998, but stabilized by 2011. So, pretty cool. I like these trees. And the reason I picked these trees is because I wanted to talk about tree rings.
Right.
It's a nature semester.
Yeah.
And I remembered we were in England at the Natural History Museum, and there was a picture of you by like this huge...
Of me?
Yeah.
Was it like fetus me?
Young Aaron, of you by this really big cross-section of a tree at the Natural History Museum. And I was remembering that picture and remembering how crazy it is just to see like thousands of years of history laid out before your eyes. And tree rings are crazy because they're not just rings. They can tell you information about the environmental conditions, if there were different infestations, fires, and so on. And they're just so neat. Because of tree rings, we basically know the last 20,000 years of weather because of rings. And I love them. They form in the spring, vascular tissue is formed. And so in the spring, because it's like soaking up all the water, the tissue is a bit wider, like the little straws that they sip the water up to the leaves through are wider. And then as the season goes on and the soil kind of gets drier, there's another layer of tissue that forms and the vascules are a bit smaller. So that forms the dark ring and then the light ring. And because it's kind of alternating between dark and light, they kind of die every season.
Right.
And then makes the tree wider.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Last week when you said on the episode tree rings, but we didn't come up with a question for it. We just said, let's feature tree rings. I was racking my brains about what can I talk about tree rings. So I had the idea of writing a tree ring themed limerick.
Why not?
But then I didn't because I realized that would be too silly. But while you were reading and talking about tree rings, otherwise known as DENDOCHRONOLOGY, the science of tree rings, I was learning about sclerochronology, which is a similar thing, but for like growth layers in seashells and other invertebrates.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah. And pretty much any hard tissue that grows via accretion, like in species other than trees, in animals, I think, then that is, although I think like coral reef skeletons, I think that also falls under this. Like you can do the same thing. You can learn about some of the environmental conditions and obviously the history of that organism, like how old it is and stuff. So I thought that was a neat parallel.
Yeah, that is really cool. It's kind of like soil layers, but in organisms.
I mean, you can do it like
around.
like rock has it, right? They look at sedimentary rock and the different layers, soil layers, as you said, coal deposits. Like, it's kind of cool how the Earth is its own black box. I know that's like a very elementary school feature that we just did, but you know what? Sometimes we are a very elementary school podcast.
Yeah, we just want to feature cool things about the planet to inspire.
Speaking of featuring, Solacene recommends this week.
Oh.
I thought that we watched a short film called Ice Merchants. Yeah. It's 14 minutes long. It's an animated short film that was just nominated for an Oscar. And we were thinking about doing a Solacene Oscar episode in March. I think we said we were going to do one last year. We didn't. But I really want to this year. I think it'll be fun. And we like movies. We think that some movies are very Solacene. Do you think this one was very Solacene or not?
It was. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's it was made by someone called João Gonzalez. He's Portuguese, but the film is silent. So it's a universal film, let me put it like that. And it's on YouTube. I think it was on the New Yorker's YouTube channel or something strange like that. But we were remarking that the animation or the art style is very reminiscent of what we were aiming for with our aforementioned nature zine. So, I mean, we kind of want like a credit on the film, but also I feel like we'd be the ones more
likely to get a copyright infringement.
Yeah.
Because there's mountains in this movie, but then it cuts to this one scene that just is basically the cover of the zine, and we were both like, what? So I think we untapped some kind of universal
imagery
symbology with the zine.
But yeah, it's a very cute little film, so heavily recommend Ice Merchants to everybody who has 14 minutes to spare. And our final question for today is about greenwashing. How do we stop greenwashing, Alicia?
3 ways. People in the Solacene will grow a conscience. But it's true. Imagine the lack of conscience it takes to install a meter into a vehicle that skirts around the regulations to get your car a regulation certification that you can then sell to people, basically, like Volkswagen did. Imagine the lack of conscience it takes to be IKEA to pay off the Forest Association to certify your beech wood that's being unsustainably sourced from Ukraine.
Yeah.
Gotta lack one. But in the Solacene, people will grow one. So that's step 1.
So corporations will grow one, and the people in them, those people. Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I know corporations, it's like they're a big thing. People are this kind of a lowest common denominator ethically among all the people who make up the corporation, but it still is made up of people.
Let's give people probably listening who listen to our podcast know, but let's just give the 10-word definition of what is greenwashing. 10 words or less.
Greenwashing is when...
That's 3.
Okay, stop counting. A company or government spends money on marketing or on some kind of development, R&D, to lie or deceive consumers of the overall environmental impact of their products.
I think it was 34 words.
Okay. So it's to either deceive them of the overall image or of just a specific product. So, like, Nature Valley granola bars are a General Mills product. And General Mills is now here trying to paint themselves as an overall green company. They still sell Cheerios and Fruit Loops and whatever.
Right.
Both Nature Valley, it's like, these are so sustainable, so good for you, so healthy, so beautiful.
Yes.
But it's like they're not actually. Yeah.
So I think there's the way that people probably usually think about it, which is an unsustainable company, let's say General Mills, feigning caring about the earth for a new product because they know that will sell.
Yeah.
And there's maybe more, like, even more devious way that you kind of mentioned with IKEA and Volkswagen, which is effectively corruption or like genuine illegal practices to obtain a certain certification.
Yeah.
Or circumvent regulations that are intended to enforce or promote sustainability. So there's kind of the consumer end side, like the Nature Valley maybe, and the more, corporate end side.
Systemic issue.
Of the badges.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, the organic certification was honestly a good indicator of if something was sustainable or not. But now, because there have been so many companies kind of trying to change what it means to be organic. It doesn't actually mean if something's sustainable anymore. It just is organic. Like, it doesn't grow within whatever reach of roads, and there's this much pesticides, but it doesn't actually mean anything anymore. And that kind of happens with a lot of the certifications. They're kind of watered down. And I don't know, greenwashing is probably my biggest enemy.
So in essence, companies do it or governments do it because it's a lot more profitable socially and fiscally to feign sustainability than to actually strive for it.
Yeah.
That's effectively it. So the two ways that I thought about stopping it, they're basically just rephrasing of what you said. One is educating buyers, and two is reducing materialism. So it's like, in terms of educating buyers, I think we should talk about this, or consumers, in the same way that we talk about educating voters. You know, for healthy democracy, we say we have to have an educated populace who knows about the issues, who knows about the candidates pasts, all the candidates and their platforms, and that way we can make a healthy choice. Now, I don't think that it should require hours of journalism for every purchase. Like, that's something that I think the sustainability community gets wrong, is when they think that the average person wants to or is willing to, or in the solar scene, like, this should not be required that you have to spend 3 hours scouring different brands online to buy a t-shirt or something like that. But I think like some basic techniques which a lot of us lack, or sometimes we kind of willfully put to rest, like seeing through marketing, like seeing through those ads and saying, well, this is just how they want me to think. It's not actually like that. But really like drilling it down in our heads, because I feel like even if it's like, yeah, well, we know that this granola brand isn't actually a local, sustainable, old guy and his wife runs it type of brand, but it kind of still works on us a little bit subconsciously.
Yeah, I think so.
So I think we have to take as active a role in combating that. Maybe in the solar scene, like, things will just be more local anyway, so there won't be so many different brands to scour through. But I think also not letting corporations define what sustainability or progress is another big problem. Like yesterday we were walking around and there was this big like supermarket
18-wheeler,
as you might say, who bringing all their loaves of bread or whatever, and it said on the side of it was just a big statement about the company's commitment to sustainability and how they're reducing their carbon and everything. I was like, this is hilarious. But if you're not thinking solar scene, you'd just be like, good for them.
Yeah,
but if you are thinking solar scene, if you're thinking big enough, in other words, then you're like, this is ironic. Like, this is silly. And I just think like forming our own opinions in general, that's kind of the key to it. And that's what I mean by like educating buyers. Yeah.
I think in the solar scene, we won't have to just take companies' word for it. Like, as you alluded to, it will just hopefully be a bit more local. Like, you just will know. So it's like if the company puts out this marketing campaign of like kind of, I always think of Tim Hortons, and they always used to say like baked fresh. And I was always like, there's no way that there's a team of people back there making donuts.
The thing is, they're defining the word fresh.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by not letting them define it for you.
Yeah. And I think also a way to combat greenwashing is the way that in the early 2000s, there was a big push by lobbyists, the public, and governments against deceptive marketing towards kids, or like targeted marketing towards kids when it comes to fast food. And there were some unhealthy programming that was being marketed towards kids. So just like guidelines for advertising and big fines if you deceive them. And also big fines for if you do that kind of second layer of greenwashing of circumventing regulations. That's just a whole other level of evil.
So basically reducing corruption, ensuring integrity, which is what you were saying about people having a conscience.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the second thing, reducing materialism, we've spoken about this a bunch on the podcast, but it basically means people buy less. When I wrote this down, I put BY instead of BUY. It was like a real life typo. It's kind of strange because I associate that more with something you would do, but also so that people are happy buying less. Like, that's another thing. Yeah. It's like, it's not just that we kind of feel guilty about buying. It's that you just don't want to buy that extra t-shirt. Because I feel like right now, this happens to me, you maybe know about the company's environmental impacts or social impacts. You're like, well, Nike, that's not a great company, but you really like the clothes or you really like the logo. So it's like, but if I just buy this one thing,
take care of it.
Yeah, take care of it. Then we kind of, it's because we have a materialism. Like, we want to justify our consumerism is another word for it, like our affixation to the things, because the things make you feel nicer and it's retail therapy, and they help form your persona. So obviously breaking all that down is good. Like being able to make a t-shirt yourself.
Yeah.
Or
food is also a big thing. That's like easier to just make your own juice than buying it in the plastic bottle or whatever. And yeah, sharing, trading, borrowing, having kind of public libraries of materials that you could use to try things out.
We talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
There's a third part of greenwashing, which I don't think is exactly greenwashing, but it's products that don't need to exist at all existing in the name of sustainability. Like we were recently at a gift store and we were like, this is hilarious because everything's marketed with, like on the box it says sustainably packaged or like sustainably made, and it's like, how about just don't make it at all?
Yeah.
So I think you had the idea that we're going to do an episode about that where we do like parodies of such products, right?
Yeah, like the banana case or whatever, but we're gonna
yeah. So like silly ones like that. Might be a little bit too mean-spirited, but we could return to it at some point in the future. A lot of teasers for future episodes on today's.
Yeah.
So listen.
Been talking about it a lot. That reminds me, I bought something yesterday, like cookies, because I'm gluten-free, so I was like, I just want to buy some cookies. And it was all over the package. It was like less packaging. Then I opened it up, and all the cookies were individually packaged. And I've just never seen something so crazy before. Because usually I try to be as like mindful as possible. I was like, oh cool, like it is sustainably packaged. It was a brand I'd never tried. Then you had to open them up. And it was like, then I started reading the whole box and all the fine print. It was like, the plastic's biodegradable, which is basically a big ol' lie. Like something can be biodegradable, but it's still not actually good to throw into a landfill or throw into a compost pile. And there were two other like greenwashing campaigns that I wanted to highlight, because there's a lot of the common ones that people just like know. It's like everyone knows the H&M Conscious brand is just BS. Like it's not actually sustainable or anything.
Alicia swears on the podcast.
But there were two other funny things. One was that Keurig, they did a whole marketing campaign about how you can recycle their K-cups now. So basically you take off the lid, you dump out the coffee grounds into the compost, and then you throw the...
Why do those things exist anyway?
Exactly. So it's like, right off the bat, it's just nonsense. But then it turns out in Canada, only Quebec and BC were actually recycling the pods. Everywhere else was just like, what's this? And would throw it in the garbage. So people thought they were recycling, they were doing the work, but then it wasn't even getting recycled. The other thing is that the brand Innocent Drinks, which is this brand that I'm pretty sure they like use food waste to make the juices or whatever. And I always thought it was an independent brand, because that's kind of how it popped up. The marketing and the logo were all very unique, like it seemed like it was indie or a bit more
indie drinks.
You know, like it'd be like some kombucha brands. It's like, you know that they're actually made in your province. Or Anyway, Innocent Drinks is just owned by Coca-Cola, which is the biggest plastic polluter in the world. And it's like, let's not.
Are we ever going to be owned by Coca-Cola?
Absolutely not.
Would you rather be owned by Coca-Cola or Pepsi? Ooh, that's the real question.
Neither.
Okay, Pepsi too sweet, so.
Thanks for that, Aaron.
I was thinking that as we start each episode with a poem, we could think of something to conclude each one. Because often when I'm editing, I'm like, how many seconds should I leave after this? Should we end with just say bye? Or sometimes, like last week, I think you were just laughing. So we should have something like a sign-off. And I was thinking, perhaps if you want to whistle a tune for us. I really want us to have a Solacene theme tune, and you're a great whistler. People need to know. Actually, it might not sound good in their ears.
It's going to sound bad. Maybe in the future we could have some kind of an assignment.
For next week.
Yeah.
Can you bring out the ukulele again? Do a few little notes?
No, I'm not talking about tunes. I'm talking about an assignment for the listeners.
Oh, an assignment? No.
Okay.
No, I guess we could do that.
The Solacene recommends.
The thing is, we could leave Solacene recommends at the end.
Yeah.
But the thing is with the assignment, it just seems so like...
Corporate?
No, not corporate. It just seems like I'm telling them what to do, and I don't like that. It's like, hey, you guys.
Hey, you.
Research this.
Okay, we'll figure out something. It's not going to be musical.
People can contact us, though, if they want... Here's the two choices. Music or questions, homework. I think I know what they'll choose.
Okay, let us know.